Blood, Bilge, and Iron Balls by Alan Abbey, a miniature war game. Well, tabletop. You don't need to use miniatures. In fact, it even comes with little counters you can use if you're more of a flat pack kind of guy. This is a war game for the age of sail. We've played at least one or two games by the time you see this. Today is going to be a bit of a theory and a bit of an introduction to the next scenario that we're going to do. So we're doing double duty, but I want to start by repacking the information from this game into my brain. Sometimes when we're tooling around the map here, let's put some motion down, shall we? Here's our deep blue sea. As we're tooling around, remember, we're powered by the wind. So if the wind is out of this direction, as long as you've got the wind at your back, you're doing good. And we have this little gauge that says, oh, just put this down. This makes it easy to tell whether you're moving at full speed or when you get to here, you're moving at 2/3 speed, and when you rotate to here, you're moving at half speed, and then once you get to about here, you are not able to move. Now, this is fairly easy. I think there's another way to think about this, but I think a lot of wargamers find this to be challenging, because as you move around the map, and you're not sure, well, when do we know is it that direction, but do I point this line at my center mast or the center line? This wind gauge means it feels like you're comparing two different angles, and you're really not. So I think there's a better way to think about this. And I'll put this out of the way for now, because I'm going to put some marks on the paper. Instead, when the wind is out of the north, instead of using this little awkward turn gauge, I think what we need to do is just think about the table almost as though it's got terrain of its own. And so what you do is you just quarter it from diagonal to diagonal, and then you cut it in half. And so again, from the rules, if our vessel is facing directly downwind, if we're moving in this direction, we're moving at full speed. In this direction, we're only able to move at 2/3 speed, and then 1/2, and then this is the no-no direction. So that's really the better way to think about it, because now as long as I am moving, as long as my direction is somewhere between southwest and southeast, I can move at full speed. And we'll call that inclusive. As we move our heading up along the compass, instead of dropping this down and trying to think about, well, which of these lines am I really keyed in on? I don't need to key in on that at all. I just need to understand, as long as I am up to and including directly having the wind on one of my port or starboard sides, I'm moving at 2/3 speed. It's once I get just 1 degree beyond that. Now, again, this book here, it does as fine a job as any in explaining how this works. It uses points instead of degrees. So every point is a 30-degree turn. And here's the turn mark, the wind gauge that they give us, right? So here's our wind direction, and which direction are you, and does it pass in that? Oh, that's hard. I just need to think about the table as though it has kind of an odd little slope, that I am only moving at half speed. If I am anywhere from moving to the east to the northeast inclusive, then I'm moving at half speed. Once I get to this line, I can turn through. This is called tacking with the wind. So the way you tack is, if you're facing upwind right at the limit, right where if I go 1 degree further to the north into the wind, I'm going to die. All my momentum is going to die. And so what happens here is you declare, I am going to tack. You make a full move and you turn 2 points. 1, 2. Notice that that's going to put you about 60 degrees. And then, or likewise, alternatively, this is going to put you 1, 2 points directly into the wind. So now you just have to wait. On the following turn, you don't have any forward momentum. You just stop and you go 1, 2. And now that puts you to where you're still moving at half speed. So what this looks like in practice is you move at half speed at a diagonal into the wind, and then you have to take a turn. You turn directly into the wind. You have to not move for a turn, and you can come back. Now that's going to move. You're going to be moving at like a quarter speed, because you're moving at full speed if you're just racing with the wind, right? But this is really the way to think about it. Just drop this guy down. And right here, it doesn't seem that bad. But what happens when the wind is out of the northeast? Well, the same thing happens, except you just need to have one gauge in your brain, and hopefully it's a gauge that has more ink than my pen here. As long as my heading is anywhere from north to east. As long as I'm in this heading, I can move at full speed. As long as my heading is anywhere along this major diagonal, I can move at 2/3. When I get beyond the diagonal, so where's my prow? There it is. When I get beyond that diagonal, up until I get to due south or due west, here's my no-no direction. I can't move in that direction. Even as I'm tacking, I make my full move, 2 points, and then I don't move, and then I go the other 2 points, and now I can move. So it is possible to get upwind, but that's the way to think about it. And if we just move this out of the way and bring our seascape back in, I think you may be able to agree with me. We'll put it down here. There's our wind direction. This time, it's out of the due. Yes, Biscotti is happy to learn this too. It's out of the due west. Okay, fine. As long as I'm anywhere on this diagonal, I'm fine. I'm moving full speed. I can move anything up to directly perpendicular, orthogonal, if you will, perpendicular to the wind. I'm at half speed. Once I get beyond that, I can move up to diagonal. It doesn't matter where I am. As long as I'm not facing any more north than either southwest, or I should say any more to the west, rather. As long as I don't turn any more to the west, unless I'm tacking, in which case 2 is the most I can turn. So I would have to pause, right? So even over here, I think it's just easier to think, hey, as long as I don't cross that diagonal. Now, you may argue, well, this is not a 45-degree angle, John. Yeah, okay, so maybe I'm not being entirely historically authentic. But I think it's close enough for government work. I think this will work well, particularly because it doesn't really favor one side or the other. Maybe it grants a little bit of favor to the guy who does not have the weather gauge, the guy who's a little bit downwind to have that extra couple of degrees. But everybody has that same couple of extra degrees. When you're changing the terrain like this, when you're changing the gauge, we're good. I'll still use this. I'll still use the gauge, mind you, but I think this is the only side I need because this has my 30-degree angle. Boop, there's 1 point. And it also has my firing arcs. All right, remember, we can fire up to this point. Okay? And likewise, my numbers, my directions, my angle here might be a little bit wider than what is shown in the book. Might be a little more narrow. I'm not sure. But ultimately, it's wider for everybody because I'm just using the one gauge. So it doesn't really make a difference. So with all of that said, that's how I'm going to think about movement. You're not going to see much of this gauge anymore. I want to show you what the next scenario is. And this scenario is actually, we're going to be doing, if you can believe it, a historical scenario. I went and I looked up one of those annals of American history that I really like. I don't know enough about it. It gets a paragraph mention, maybe a 5-minute explanation in our history books, which is a shame because it's a critical part of the United States of America stepping onto the world scene. When the colonies broke away, they were broke, and they didn't have the protection of the crown anymore. So there were these bad guys in North Africa. They were slavers. They were white slavers, and I don't mean they were white people that practiced slavery. They were Africans who enslaved white people. And they didn't do that to the British because the British paid them off. But the broke Americans couldn't afford to get paid off. So all they could afford was a couple of big naval vessels to go stomping around the Mediterranean and beat up on the pashas that wanted to enslave the American sailors. This is called the Barbary pirates, the Barbary corsairs. Because we're talking about a bunch of broke North Africans and a bunch of broke Americans going to war, you don't see battles with those massive ships of the line. What you see are a bunch of these smaller vessels called, well, let's take a look-see here. And in fact, the battle that we're going to do, spoiler alert, is when the USS Philadelphia beat up on, it was actually one American vessel that had been captured by the Barbary pirates and one catch. It's going to be the USS Philadelphia, and here's what our ship records look like. It's the Miraboka. This is one of the Pasha's vessels, and as you can see, it's fairly small. It's a 24-gun frigate. In fighting sail, frigates are largely smaller vessels. They only have a couple of guns, so you can see here, 2 on a side. Does not have a whole lot of hull points. If you compare this to something like one of the big, impressive, here's the HMS Majestic, and majestic she is too. Now, she moves a little slower, but she's got a lot of guns. She's got 1, 2, 3 sails that take 5 hits. She's got 2 complements of Marines. I don't think anybody on this battle even has Marines. It's got a much bigger captain's crew with 3 points on the star. On the other hand, if you take a look here, the Mirboka has 3 sails, but it only takes 3 damage. It's only got 6 hull points. And what's happened is the Mirboka has captured an American brig called the Celia. But wait, why did I cross out sloop? Now, a brig is a 2-masted ship, and if we look at the ship records that are available in Blood, Bilge, and Iron Balls, Allen does, in addition to the vessels that were present at, it has both Trafalgar and the Battle of the Nile. So there's the HMS Majestic, we looked at that, the Alexander, Le Peuple Souverain, and then what is this one? Le Franklin, an 80-gun. Look at all those hull boxes. We can have 5 fires, and we'll just dust it off. We get 5 fires here. What is this? So this is the 24-gun frigate. This is the ship record that I based the Mirboka on. All right, but then if we look at the next smallest one, here's our sloop. Oh, it's called a sloop, and it's a 2-masted vessel. That's the smallest vessel we've got here. So there's really nothing between this sloop and a brig, and here we get back into the frigate. Now, you might argue, there's a couple of different ways to run this scenario. You could say, well, I'll treat this as a brig, but a brig only has 3 masts. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is, as it's shown here, I'm going to go ahead and just have Mirboka, and I'm going to have this little brig is going to be a 2-master. It's got a hull of 3. So if we just kind of look at firepower, we're looking at 3 guns, and the USS Philadelphia was a 36-gun frigate. Now, okay, why did I cross that off? Because Alan, what are you doing? You're killing me, bro. Again, let me look. Here's our 24-gun frigate. Here's our 28-gun frigate. That's a 32-gun frigate. And our, wait a minute, 36? Okay, well, that's fine. So the next page should have, there's our 38. Wait, it goes directly from 38 to 32. But the USS Philadelphia, captained by Captain Bainbridge, was a 36-gun frigate. I said, oh, well, I need something kind of in the middle. So instead of changing the guns, note, we're going to have 3 guns on the Barbary side and 3 guns on the good guys side. I gave the Philadelphia 1 extra hull box before it would strike its colors. All right. And historically, the Philadelphia chased down the Mirboka as it was escorting this captured American brig called the Celia. But there's something else interesting that I need to show you on this record sheet. How did I do this scenario? Because look at this. This is a little weird. Look, the Celia, when it has 3 masts, now, I've said it before, I'm not a mathologist, but 1, 2. We have to decide, how are we going to do this? Does the Celia really have 3? It doesn't have 3 masts. So when it loses 1, does it move at 2? And when it loses another, it moves at 1, and it will never be treated as 0. I don't like that at all. Now, a sloop, the first thing you would say is, oh, well, why don't we just ignore the 3M line? Just erase that from existence. But then the maximum speed of this little brig is going to be 9 inches. But that means it's going to be slower under full sail than a larger vessel, which doesn't sit right with me. The other thing you could say is, well, all right, why don't we just cross off this bottom one? But then it's never really going to be all that slow. So instead, what I'm going to do to resolve this little conundrum is go on the internet and complain about it. But I'm also going to cross off this middle row. This is a bit of a, we need an errata out there, right? Bit of an oopsie doopsie. And it's a wonderful rule set. So this is not necessarily a reason not to play, but it is kind of important to look at the scenario and understand how these rules work beforehand. You know the difference, now that I think about it, when we look at this fire control? When you look at, do all of the big vessels only have 3 boxes? Oh, they do. That's interesting. No, they don't. Here we go. So let's take a look here. One of the reasons these ships are more fragile, you can have 5 fires started, but look, 1, 2, 3 turns before you take big damage. Whereas with the big vessels, what are we looking at here? The HMS Defense now, you get 5 turns. Those fires can smolder a little more. So it's not just the large number of hull boxes and other things that can take damage. It's also the amount of fire that you can just kind of ignore. And again, the other thing to be aware of is that the brig and the frigate over here on the Barbary side, they've got 3 crew points. We've got 3 crew points on the American side. So it's kind of a fair fight from that perspective as well. The Americans do have 1 unit of Marines, and it's important to remember that these scenarios, when you cross off the last hull box, that does not mean that the ship was sunk. What that means is that you struck your colors. Your crew is so busy trying to not die by patching holes and stuff that you just run up the colors and say, look, we give up. Just come save us. Pull us off this hulk, would you? And likewise with each of these ships. So it's going to be a 2-on-1, and we're going to add 1 extra little wrinkle into the mix, and that is Shoals. Because historically, the USS Philadelphia was the original USS Philadelphia. There's, of course, a couple of modern vessels have borne that name, ran aground on a shoal, and the Americans had to return and burn it so that the Barbary pirates didn't have a fairly expensive technical piece of machinery stolen from the Americans. And maybe I'll throw a picture up here to show you what that looked like. There are a lot of paintings. It was in all the papers, as they say. Now, the fun thing with shoals is that unlike in some other games where this template tells you that the shoal is... Oh, you know what? Now that I think about it, let's take a look at those pirates. See, we have a 2-masted ship and we have a 3-masted ship. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this, because it makes it really easy to see. Now, these are both smaller than the big boy. The big boy, right? It's large for the American Navy at the time. The British would have chuckled and been like, oh my. But, you know, it's okay. The roles have been reversed over the years, and maybe they'll be reversed again. So I like the British people, and if the roles are reversed, then just be nice to us, okay? So when it comes to shoals, first thing to be aware of is that in this game, it's not just this template that matters. It's also the area around it. This is not a cliff. I'm fine. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble. Every half-inch that surrounds this increases your chances of running aground. That means that out to... Well, what does it mean by that means? Well, let's go look at the rule book, because it has a lovely little template that shows you how the shoal, the shallow water there, extends beyond the template. And here's how it works. It also works similar to islands, but because these are right near the surface, so we'll kind of zoom in there and maybe we can see. There we go. So this shoal right here, if you are passing directly over it, you will run aground on a score of 3, 4, 5, or 6. If you're within a half an inch, it's on a 4, 5, 6. If you're within a full inch, and then an inch and a half, it becomes 5, 6, and 6, respectively. And what does that look like as far as, let's just drop a ruler down so we can see that. So in addition to the template itself, aground on a 3 up, you've got this 1.5 inch surround where if my vessel is, if any part of it is within a half an inch of the shoal, this little vessel will run aground on a 4 or better, on a 5 or better, on a 6 or better, and we just roll a d6. But there's another little interesting wrinkle that we can have. Because these 2 ships are really trying to escape from the Philadelphia, one of the things we can do is we can say, look, this ship has a much lower draft. So it has a, what are we going to call it? Let's call it a -2 for the Celia. It is, after all, a brig. It's got a shallower draft. It doesn't sink as deeply, which really means that we can ignore those first 2 range bands, because there's no way for him to roll anything less than a 4, which means if he is within that 1.5 inches, normally it's a 6, but he can't roll a 6. If he rolls a 6, it's really a 4. This is also, so until he gets within a half an inch, and here he only runs aground on a 6, and here he only runs aground on a 5 or a 6. So we'll give him a -2, and we'll give this old boy a -1. So he will only run aground when he is sitting directly on the shoal on a result of, instead of a 3 up, the other way to look at it is, he will only run aground on a 5. Wait a minute, is that right? If we're at -2, oh, I said -1. So this is a 4 up, and then a 5 up, and then a 6 up. So he can scoot just that little extra half-inch closer to the shoal. I'm going to use 2 of these, and we'll kind of do a same running battle where the idea here is that the USS Philadelphia has the weather gauge. It's managed to cut them off and is trying to recapture the Celia. That's his main prize. If he can get it back, he will have protected the sailors. He will have made sure that the Africans did not, the Arab and the Muslim Africans did not enslave his fellow Americans, and that's a pretty big victory. So that's going to be a victory in its own right. If he can take both of those ships, and bear in mind, there is at least one recorded battle. Oh, I have a date for this, too. There is one recorded battle of an American vessel taking on 9 of these guys and coming out the victor. This battle that we're doing by Captain Bainbridge, who I think he went on to become an admiral, too. This took place on August 26th, 1802. So the American colonies as a nation at 1776 are only about they're less than 30 years old still. This probably took a few years to ship, and then they actually would have one of these prowling around the Mediterranean at all times. It was this, and I think the Constitution was a 4th-rate ship. That was a much bigger vessel. But there are a couple that swapped in and out, and that's going to be the scenario we have. These 2 guys trying to make it back to port with this big boy having the weather gauge, being upwind, and getting to dictate the terms of the battle, but having to avoid these shoals because these guys can largely just run right over them. And if these guys get grounded on the shoals, then it's going to allow the American vessel to really pick its shots. One last thing to point out from a historical perspective, this was right after the Americans, they said, look, I can't afford to have to worry about 24-pound guns, 36-pound guns. All my cannons are 36s. All my cannonballs are 36ers. They might have had a couple of carronades in the front and back, but by and large, they said, we cannot afford foundries producing lots of different material. We're just going to make it simple. Everything is 36s. So that's kind of one of the things here that in most cases, this 32-gun frigate might have had a mix of 24s and 36s. The USS Philadelphia at the time, it only had the 36s. A little less flexibility, but a little more punching power for its weight. That also means that he's going to sink a little deeper. And so even though he's only a 36-gun ship in an era where 120 guns were not unheard of, we're still going to treat him as though he will run aground as per normal. So that's kind of what we're looking at in our next scenario. I'm just going to say, this is the Americans, these are the brigs, these are the shoals. I'm not going to go through all of it. If it comes up in the battle, it comes up, and we'll address it when it comes. But until then, I'm praying for you.